The custom-poured 50-foot concrete parking pad alongside my house was completely empty. It was 4:30 p.m. on a Friday. I had just returned from a brutal 3-day compliance audit in Chicago. I didn't drop my luggage in shock. I didn't scream or run wildly into the street. I am a director of fleet risk management for a national logistics firm. My entire career is built on tracking heavy, high-value commercial assets and neutralizing theft. The missing asset in question was not a standard commuter sedan or a flimsy fiberglass camper. It was a custom-ordered 2026 Class A luxury motorhome. It was a $150,000 mansion on wheels, featuring a heavy-duty diesel engine, expanding slide-out floor plans, a premium leather interior, and an off-grid solar array. I had purchased it entirely in cash 2 months ago. It was registered exclusively in my name. There was no broken glass on the driveway. Oh, top right drawer of my heavy oak desk, the top right drawer of my heavy oak desk, the drawer where I kept my vehicle titles, passports, and spare keys, was slightly ajar. The brass cylinder lock mechanism had been violently snapped. The jagged, with silver gouge marks deeply scored into the expensive wood, made it incredibly obvious that someone had simply jammed a heavy flathead screwdriver into the gap and pried the drawer open with brute force. I pulled out my cell phone and accessed my interior security cameras. I scrubbed the timeline backward to Thursday afternoon. At 2:15 p.m., my mother, Barbara, unlocked the front door using the physical emergency spare key I had given her strictly for plumbing emergencies when I traveled. Yeah, and she didn't come alone. Following right behind her was my 26-year-old brother, Leo. Leo was wearing expensive sunglasses and carrying a large duffel bag, flashing a wide, arrogant grin. He was the family's golden child, chronically unemployed, drowning in credit card debt, and entirely funded by my parents' enabling behavior. On the high-definition camera feed, Barbara walked directly into my office. She didn't hesitate. She pulled a flathead screwdriver from her designer purse. I jammed it aggressively into the brass lock of my desk and forcefully popped the drawer open. She dug through my organized files, triumphantly pulled out the heavy set of electronic RV keys, and tossed them to Leo. He caught them, did a mocking little salute toward the camera he didn't know was recording, and they both walked out the front door. They hadn't just borrowed a family vehicle. Barbara had actively committed residential burglary, destroyed a locked piece of furniture, and facilitated the grand theft of a 6-figure commercial asset. I didn't call the local police immediately. I dialed my mother's cell phone. "Victoria, you're home early," Barbara answered on the second ring, her voice dripping with a fake, overly sweet cheerfulness that instantly set my teeth on edge. "Where's my motorhome, Barbara?" I asked, keeping my voice completely flat and devoid of any emotional inflection. The fake cheerfulness evaporated instantly, replaced by the defensive, our condescending tone of a suburban matriarch who genuinely believed the penal code didn't apply to her bloodline. "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Victoria," Barbara sighed heavily into the receiver. "Leo has a massive weekend trip planned at Silver Pine State Park with his old fraternity brothers. He needed a reliable, comfortable vehicle to camp in. We knew you were out of town on a business trip, so we just borrowed it. It's sitting in your driveway doing nothing anyway." "You didn't borrow it. Enter my home without permission, and you enter my home without permission, and you used a screwdriver to physically destroy a locked drawer to access the keys. You committed breaking and entering to steal a $150,000 vehicle." "Steal? Listen to yourself." Barbara scoffed loudly, her voice rising in maternal outrage. "It's a family vehicle now, Victoria. We are a family. And the family shares its wealth. You make a ridiculous amount of money. You can't just hoard luxury items while your brother struggles. Don't be so selfish." It was the classic toxic battle cry of the entitled enabler. The family communism excuse. She honestly believed that because we shared genetics, My bank account and my heavily insured commercial assets were automatically communal property. If the family is supposed to share its wealth, I asked, leaning back against my desk, perfectly setting the trap, then why didn't you and Dad simply give Leo your brand new luxury SUV for his camping trip? There was a brief, incredibly uncomfortable silence on the line. Our SUV isn't suitable for this kind of trip, Barbara finally muttered, her voice tightening with obvious defensive irritation. Leo is trying to network with some very important people this weekend. A lot of these boys have wealthy executive fathers. He needs to project success. He can't show up to a luxury VIP campsite in a standard family car. He needs to impress his friends, Victoria. Your RV is massive and flashy. It's exactly what he needs to show off a little. I actually let out a short, dry laugh. She had just openly confessed that she committed a felony burglary, so her unemployed son could play pretend millionaire in the woods. You have exactly 20 minutes to contact Leo and instruct him to drive the vehicle back to my concrete pad, I stated. I dare call the police and embarrass him and dare call the police and embarrass him in front of his friends over a family misunderstanding. You are completely dead to us, Victoria. Do you hear me? We will cut you off completely. You will have no family left. I stood up from the desk. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I didn't beg for her approval. I simply smiled into the empty room. Is that a promise? I asked quietly. Barbara gasped sharply, completely taken aback by the sheer, unbothered ice in my response. Before she could process the insult or scream another threat, I hit the red button and disconnected the call. Arguing with sociopathic enablers is a massive waste of operational bandwidth. I opened my laptop and logged into the commercial telematics portal for my fleet tracking software. Because the RV was a high-value asset, I hadn't relied on a cheap factory GPS. I had hardwired a military-grade active cellular transponder directly into the engine's diagnostic port. The high-resolution digital map loaded instantly. A pulsating red icon appeared exactly 180 miles north of my house. Leo hadn't just taken the RV to a local campsite. He had driven my luxury asset completely across state lines, navigating deep into the heavily wooded, restricted backcountry jurisdiction of a neighboring state's regional park system. He was currently parked and stationary near a large lake, entirely unaware that crossing a state border with a stolen vehicle had just escalated his joyride into a federal jurisdiction. I picked up my cell phone, bypassed my local municipal police department entirely, and dialed the direct dispatch line for the State Highway Patrol in the neighboring state. State Troopers Dispatch, Operator 4. A crisp, mechanical voice answered. My name is Victoria Sterling, I stated cleanly, reading the heavy vehicle identification number directly off my laptop screen. I am reporting the felony grand theft of a 2026 Class A luxury motorhome, valued at $150,000. The vehicle was stolen via forced residential entry and burglary. It has crossed state lines, and I have a live, active satellite lock on its exact coordinates. I also have high-definition video evidence of the accomplices who orchestrated the theft. Hold the line, Ms. Sterling, the State Highway Patrol dispatcher instructed smoothly. Her voice shifted instantly from standard intake to rapid, high-priority tactical coordination. The heavy mechanical clacking of a keyboard echoed through the receiver. You are confirming the stolen commercial asset is valued at $150,000. The GPS telemetry actively places it across state lines in the Silver Pines State Park jurisdiction. That is correct, I replied evenly, my eyes locked on the pulsating red dot glowing brightly on my encrypted fleet management dashboard. The vehicle is currently stationary at VIP Campsite 4. Because the asset crossed state lines during the commission of the theft, I am requesting that the intercept be treated as a felony interstate grand theft. Yet the suspect is my 26-year-old brother, Leo Sterling. He is currently unarmed, but he has a documented history of severe entitlement and will not expect a tactical law enforcement response. "Copy that, Miss Sterling," the dispatcher said, the heavy crackle of encrypted police radio frequencies bleeding into the background. When a six-figure commercial asset crosses a state border, it automatically triggers an active federal felony pursuit protocol. Then we have 4 heavy-duty intercept units currently patrolling the highway near the state park entrance. We are dispatching them to the exact GPS coordinates now. 180 miles north of my quiet suburban office, the dark, freezing woods of Silver Pine State Park were echoing with the loud, thumping bass of a portable Bluetooth speaker. Leo was living the absolute peak of his $150,000 fantasy. He had parked my massive, it's a 40-foot custom luxury motorhome perfectly on the oversized concrete pad of the VIP campsite. He had extended the electronic slide-out floor plans, deployed the massive LED-lit awning, and set up expensive camping chairs around a roaring, smokeless fire pit. Sitting around the fire were 4 of his old fraternity brothers, young, wealthy men whose fathers were actual corporate executives. Leo was standing near the glowing fire, holding an expensive imported craft beer, wearing a brand-new or tailored Patagonia winter jacket he had bought entirely on our father's credit card. "Yeah, I just decided to pull the trigger and buy it in cash," Leo bragged loudly over the music, gesturing casually toward the gleaming, custom-painted exterior of my RV. His arrogant, untouchable grin was illuminated by the firelight. The housing market is a joke right now. I wanted something I could take cross-country whenever I felt like it. It's got a full solar array on the roof. Must be nice to just drop 6 figures on. Must be nice to just drop 6 figures on a weekend toy. We thought you were still struggling at that startup. Nah, I cashed out my equity, Leo lied smoothly, completely intoxicated by the validation. He had actually convinced himself that simply holding my electronic key fob magically transferred the title of the vehicle into his name. Wouldn't he assume that because our mother had handed him the keys, he was completely immune to the penal code? He assumed wrong. The quiet, crackling ambiance of the dark forest was not interrupted by a polite knock from a park ranger asking them to turn the music down. It was completely shattered by the deafening, aggressive roar of 4 heavy, modified V8 engines tearing down the gravel access road. Leo stopped talking mid-sentence. His wealthy friends turned around, their expensive beers frozen in their hands. Before Leo could even process what was happening, 4 massive black and white State Highway Patrol Chevy Tahoe Interceptors violently swerved into VIP Lot 4, their heavy all-terrain tires aggressively locking up and throwing a massive cloud of dust and gravel into the air. They parked in a tactical chevron formation, completely blocking the only exit to the campsite and physically boxing in the massive motorhome. A blinding, explosive wall of strobing red, blue, and white LED takedown lights instantly flooded the campsite, completely washing out the warm glow of the fire pit. The heavy dual-tone wail of a federal police siren blasted for exactly 2 agonizing seconds, vibrating the heavy glass windows of the RV before abruptly cutting off. Leo's survival instinct completely short-circuited. He squinted against the blinding wall of light, instinctively raising his hand over his eyes. Well, he assumed this was a noise complaint. He assumed a cop was going to casually walk up to the fire, ask for his ID, and tell them to keep the music down. He took a confident, arrogant step forward, ready to use his fake millionaire persona to charm his way out of a ticket. "Whoa, officers, take it easy," Leo called out loudly, raising his empty hand in a practiced gesture of annoyed diplomacy. "We rented this lot for the whole weekend. I can turn the music down if it's bothering the other—" The deafening, amplified boom of a police PA system completely obliterated his sentence, echoing violently through the dense trees. "Driver of the class, a motorhome!" The mechanical, uncompromising voice roared over the loudspeaker. "Drop the beverage, do not reach for your waistband. Put your hands straight up in the air. Do it now!" Leo froze completely. His imported beer slipped from his fingers, shattering against the dirt. He couldn't see the troopers' faces behind the blinding takedown lights, but he saw the distinct, terrifying silhouettes of 4 heavily armed state troopers actively using the heavy, reinforced steel doors of their Tahoes for tactical cover. They weren't holding ticket books. They had their service weapons drawn, leveled directly at his chest. This wasn't a noise complaint. This was a high-risk felony extraction. The 4 wealthy fraternity brothers, immediately realizing the catastrophic severity of the situation, didn't hesitate. They instinctively threw their hands high into the air and rapidly backed away from Leo, physically distancing themselves from the primary target. Their rich fathers had paid for expensive lawyers in the past, but none of them were going to catch a bullet in the woods for a guy who couldn't even pay his own rent. Wait, there's a mistake!" Leo screamed into the blinding light, and he frantically shoved both of his shaking hands, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, pathetic croak of unfiltered panic. His arrogant, self-made millionaire persona vaporized in a microsecond. He frantically shoved both of his shaking hands entirely over his head. "I'm unarmed. This is my RV. Well, it's my sister's RV. It's a family vehicle. We share it. The family shares its wealth. And I have the keys." When a vehicle is flagged in the National Crime Information Center, NCIC database, as an active stolen commercial asset that crossed state lines, the police do not care about family communism excuses. They treat the driver as a hostile threat to officer safety. "Turn around and face the motorhome," the trooper commanded over the PA, the raw aggression leaving zero room for negotiation. "Walk backward toward the sound of my voice. Do not lower your hands." Leo's entire body began to tremble violently. He slowly turned his back to the blinding lights and staggered backward over the uneven dirt and gravel of the campsite. He was sobbing loudly, his expensive designer sneakers dragging heavily in the dust. The frat brothers watched in absolute horrified silence as the guy who had just bragged about dropping 6 figures in cash was treated like a dangerous fugitive. "Stop!" the trooper yelled. "Drop to your knees! Across your ankles!" Leo's knees buckled instantly. He dropped heavily onto the cold, hard dirt of the campsite. The heavy metallic clatter of handcuffs unspooling from a tactical belt echoed sharply in the quiet forest. A massive state trooper closed the distance in 3 rapid strides, stepping heavily onto the back of Leo's designer shoes to keep him pinned. The trooper didn't hesitate. He forcefully grabbed Leo's right wrist, wrenching his arm violently behind his back. Then he grabbed the left wrist, crossing them tightly together at the small of Leo's back, and secured them with a pair of heavy, freezing steel handcuffs. The ratcheting click of the metal teeth engaging was deafening. "Share your wealth?" the trooper scoffed, hauling Leo roughly to his feet by the center chain of the cuffs and spinning him around to face his completely silent friends. "The registered owner provided us with active or commercial-grade telematics and security footage of your mother destroying a locked desk drawer with a screwdriver to acquire those keys. You crossed state lines with it, son. You are under arrest for grand theft and a federal violation of the Dyer Act." The heavy steel door of the Chevy Tahoe Interceptor slammed shut with a definitive, ringing thud, instantly plunging Leo into the suffocating, pitch-black darkness of the rear suspect cage. He was violently shoved sideways onto the hard plastic bench, his wrists screaming in agony from the tight metal handcuffs biting into his skin directly behind his back. The expensive Patagonia jacket he wore to project his fake millionaire status was smeared with dirt and pine needles from being forced onto his knees in front of his wealthy fraternity brothers. Through the thick wire mesh of the security partition, Leo watched the absolute destruction of his 6-figure fantasy unfold in the harsh glare of the strobing red and blue tactical lights. His 4 wealthy friends hadn't stayed to defend his honor. They had rapidly packed their expensive duffel bags in complete, terrified silence. They threw their gear into a lifted Jeep Rubicon, entirely abandoning their weekend trip and leaving Leo behind. They didn't want any part of an active federal grand theft investigation. The 2 state troopers were meticulously clearing the interior of my 2026 luxury motorhome with high-powered flashlights. They weren't treating it like a borrowed family camper. They were processing it as an active, contaminated commercial crime scene. They documented the mileage, checked the heavy digital generator readouts, and bagged the empty imported beer bottles Leo had casually left sitting on the premium leather dining booth. Then, the low, mechanical rumble of a massive diesel engine cut through the quiet forest. A heavy-duty, flatbed commercial recovery wrecker, completely wrapped in the high-visibility yellow and green chevron decals of the State Department of Transportation, pulled aggressively onto the gravel access road. It wasn't a standard city tow truck. It was a specialized 3-axle commercial unit specifically dispatched for hauling seized heavy freight and high-value felony impounds. Leo pressed his face against the cold, condensation-covered glass of the police cruiser, watching in absolute horrified disbelief as heavy steel chains were hooked directly onto the massive front axle of the $150,000 mansion on wheels. The heavy-duty winch whined loudly, violently dragging the massive 12-ton vehicle backward over the gravel and up the steep metal incline. The pristine tires squeaked sharply against the wet metal deck. Then the operator threw heavy nylon tie-down straps over all 6 wheels, ratcheting them down with intense, mechanical precision. My brother let out a sharp, breathless sob, squirming uncomfortably against the hard plastic bench to relieve the pressure on his handcuffed wrists. He had driven into the woods feeling like a wealthy executive, eager to show off a stolen status symbol. Now he was a freezing, terrified 26-year-old in the back of a state cruiser, or watching his massive prop being hauled away to a highly secured state environmental impound lot across state lines. The massive state trooper opened the front driver's side door of the cruiser, slid behind the heavy steering wheel, and picked up his police radio. "Dispatch Unit 7, the trooper reported, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. "Suspect is secured in custody. We're transporting him to the county intake facility now for federal grand theft processing and interstate vehicle trafficking under the Dyer Act. The stolen asset has been secured and transferred to the primary state commercial impound." 180 miles south, my quiet suburban home office was warmly illuminated by the soft glow of my desk lamp. I was sitting perfectly still at my heavy oak desk, directly next to the violently splintered drawer Barbara had destroyed. My laptop was open in front of me. The military-grade cellular telematics dashboard displayed the live, pulsating red icon of my massive RV. It was no longer stationary at VIP Campsite 4. A sharp green notification banner had appeared at the top of the screen. Vehicle ignition terminated. Speed 0 miles per hour. Commercial asset in transit via secondary carrier. My cell phone, resting face down on the polished oak surface, abruptly began vibrating violently. The invasive buzzing shattered the quiet of my office. I checked my watch. It was exactly 10:15 p.m. I reached over and picked up the phone. The caller ID simply read, "Barbara Mobile." I hit the green accept button, put the phone on speaker, and laid it flat next to my laptop keyboard. "Victoria!" my mother shrieked into the microphone. Her voice wasn't condescending or arrogant anymore. It was a high-pitched, raw scream of absolute, unfiltered hysteria that echoed violently off the walls of my office. The background noise on her end was chaotic. The loud, frantic jingling of keys, heavy footsteps rushing across hardwood floors, and the heavy breathing of someone in the midst of a full-blown panic attack. "Victoria, what did you do?" Barbara wailed. Leo just called me from a holding cell at the county jail. He used his only phone call. He was crying so hard he could barely speak. When he said heavily armed state troopers raided his campsite, threw him on the ground at gunpoint in front of his friends, and arrested him for federal grand theft. Tell me you didn't actually call the police on your own flesh and blood. I called the State Highway Patrol dispatch for the neighboring jurisdiction, Barbara. I replied smoothly, my voice entirely devoid of emotion. I reported a stolen commercial asset, and I provided them with the active military-grade GPS coordinates to intercept it safely. He was just pulled over and humiliated in front of his fraternity brothers, my mother screamed, her breathing rapid and shallow, the panic suffocating her words. They threw him in handcuffs and dragged him away like a violent criminal. He was just trying to network and build a future. You knew he needed that RV. We share our wealth. He transported a stolen, $150,000 commercial asset across a state border. Barbara, I stated, listing the facts exactly as they appeared on my telematics dashboard. The Highway Patrol executed a standard high-risk felony extraction for an interstate theft. That is exactly what happens when you use a flathead screwdriver to destroy a locked drawer, steal an electronic key fob, or hand a massive piece of machinery to an unemployed 26-year-old with zero legal authorization to operate it. "You have to stop this immediately," my mother screamed, her voice cracking into a desperate sob. "Call the state troopers right now and tell them it was a massive mistake. Tell them you gave him permission to borrow the motorhome. If he gets charged with a federal felony, it will permanently destroy his entire life. He will never get a corporate job. He will never be able to rent an apartment. You are ruining his entire future over a stupid camping trip." It was the classic, toxic playbook of the enabler. She assumed the federal legal system operated like a retail store complaint department. She assumed that if she just yelled loud enough or cried hard enough about family, I would simply call the manager of the police department and cancel a federal felony arrest like a mistaken food order. She expected me to perjure myself, and commit massive commercial insurance fraud, and absorb a $150,000 liability just to protect her golden child from the consequences of his own sociopathic arrogance. "I cannot call the police station and tell them it was a mistake, Barbara," I explained, leaning back in my leather office chair, "because it wasn't a mistake. And even if I wanted to perjure myself to protect Leo, the situation is completely out of my hands." Or the moment the state troopers flagged the vehicle as a stolen asset that crossed state lines, the incident escalated beyond a simple civil complaint into federal jurisdiction. There was a sharp, terrified silence on the line, the heavy, rhythmic breathing of my mother trying to process the absolute destruction of her golden child's weekend echoed through the speaker. "What do you mean it's out of your hands?" Barbara whispered, her voice trembling violently. "You are the owner. Or just drop the charges." "I am the registered owner, yes," I confirmed calmly, turning my laptop screen slightly to view the automated insurance protocol that had just activated in my inbox. "But my commercial fleet underwriter holds the primary liability policy on that massive asset. When a federal theft report is officially filed and a heavy vehicle is violently extracted in a neighboring state, the insurance company automatically locks the legal file to prevent insurance fraud." I picked up a pen from my desk and tapped it once against the splintered wood of the destroyed drawer. If I suddenly call the state troopers and claim I accidentally reported my own motorhome stolen while my brother was driving it across state lines, the insurance fraud division will immediately launch a criminal investigation into me for filing a false police report. I continued, my tone flat and mechanical. I am not risking my spotless record, my corporate logistics career, and 10 years in a federal penitentiary to cover up a felony theft you orchestrated. "Victoria, please," Barbara wailed in the background, entirely abandoning reason. "I am getting in my car right now. I am driving 3 hours to that precinct. I am going to tell the desk sergeant that this is a massive family misunderstanding. I will tell them I found the spare key in a drawer and gave it to him, and that you are just being vindictive. I will demand they release him immediately. You cannot buy your way out of a federal auto theft charge, Barbara, I stated cleanly. You are a monster. My father's deep, booming voice suddenly cut through the speakerphone. He had clearly snatched the phone from my mother's trembling hands, the patriarch of the family, attempting to reclaim control of the chaos through sheer volume. When this is over, we are completely cutting you off from this family. Do you hear me? You are dead to us, Victoria. Dead. You already promised me that 4 hours ago, I said quietly, executando a call back, letal da nossa OP, diretriz tres. But before you drive 3 hours to the state line, you might want to check your front porch. What are you talking about? My father snapped angrily. Because the primary theft occurred inside my home in this jurisdiction, I explained, my voice turning to pure ice. I didn't just call the state troopers, and I also provided my local municipal police department with the high-definition security footage of Barbara using an emergency key to enter my home, destroying my locked oak desk with a screwdriver, and physically stealing the electronic key fob. The line went completely dead silent. The local police just dispatched 2 patrol cruisers to your address to arrest Barbara for residential burglary and conspiracy to commit grand theft auto, I concluded. Oh, so I wouldn't leave the house if I were you. The line didn't go dead. I didn't hang up. I leaned back in my leather office chair, the cell phone resting on speakerphone on my polished oak desk, and listened perfectly still to the absolute destruction of their unbothered arrogance. 10 miles across the city, the quiet, manicured streets of my parents' upscale suburban neighborhood were abruptly illuminated by the aggressive, rhythmic flashing of red and blue LED strobe lights. The Barbara didn't even have time to grab her designer overnight bag or put on her coat to drive across state lines and rescue Leo. The heavy dual-tone chirp of a police siren blared for exactly 2 seconds directly outside her living room window, violently vibrating the expensive glass. "Richard, what is happening?" Barbara shrieked over the phone, her voice completely stripped of its confident suburban superiority. The sound of heavy, rapid footsteps echoed through the speaker as she frantically rushed toward her front window. "Why are there 2 police cruisers blocking our driveway? Tell them to leave. Tell them we are dealing with a family dispute." "Barbara, step away from the window and open the door," my father, Richard, ordered. His voice was thin, reedy, and vibrating with an unfiltered panic that completely destroyed his booming patriarch persona. "Do not argue with them. I will call a lawyer right now." The heavy, metallic thud of a police officer aggressively knocking on their solid wood front door echoed loudly through the phone line. "Police department, open the door!" A deep, commanding voice barked from the porch. "Victoria, you tell them right now to stop this!" Barbara wailed into the phone from across her living room, her voice cracking into a high-pitched sob of sheer terror. "You cannot do this to your own mother over a stupid drawer. I just borrowed a key. Tell them you gave it to me. And tell them—" "You didn't borrow a key, Barbara," I stated cleanly, my voice projecting out of the phone speaker sitting on her coffee table, loud enough for her to hear over the pounding at the door. "You executed a premeditated residential burglary to facilitate the felony theft of a $150,000 commercial asset. You broke my locked desk with a screwdriver. You were recorded on high-definition video stealing an electronic key fob. And you handed it to an unemployed 26-year-old so he could illegally transport it across state lines." I paused for exactly 1 second, ensuring my next words landed with absolute, lethal clarity. "You aren't a mother trying to help her son," I concluded mechanically. "You are an active accomplice to a federal crime. Open the door now or we will breach it," the officer roared from the porch. The heavy thud of a police baton striking the wooden frame, sending a shockwave through the phone line. Richard frantically unlocked the deadbolt and ripped the front door open. "Officers, wait, please. This is a massive misunderstanding." Richard stammered loudly, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "My wife didn't steal anything. My daughter is just angry over a family argument. We have an emergency key to her house. We are her parents." "Richard Sterling? Oh, Barbara Sterling?" a veteran municipal detective asked, entirely ignoring my father's desperate attempt at damage control. The heavy crunch of tactical boots stepping over the threshold into their pristine foyer echoed through the phone. "Yes, detective, but listen to me," Richard pleaded. "Barbara Sterling, step away from the staircase," the detective commanded, his tone dropping into a low, uncompromising register of absolute law enforcement authority. "When you are under arrest for felony residential burglary, destruction of private property, and conspiracy to commit grand theft auto." "Burglary?" Barbara shrieked, completely abandoning her polite suburban persona. She stepped aggressively toward the detective. "I am a mother. I used a spare key to enter my own daughter's home. It is not burglary to go into your child's house. I didn't steal anything. I just gave my son the keys to a family vehicle so he could go camping. Our SUV wasn't suitable for his networking trip. You are making a terrible mistake. The family shares its wealth. Ma'am, utilizing an emergency access key specifically to bypass a locked interior door, physically destroy a locked piece of furniture with a flathead screwdriver, and remove a highly insured commercial asset without the owner's explicit consent is the exact, literal definition of residential burglary," the detective recited smoothly, unspooling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. "The registered owner provided us with time-stamped, high-definition interior security footage of the entire incident. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." "No, Richard, do something," Barbara wailed, struggling wildly as the detective forcefully grabbed her right arm, twisting it firmly behind her back. "Tell them I'm your wife. They are arresting me for taking a stupid camping trip key." "Or Richard!" Richard didn't step forward. He took a slow, deliberate step backward, physically distancing himself from the woman who had just confessed to breaking and entering on a recorded line. He looked at her, his face completely pale and slick with cold sweat, realizing that his own legal exposure was dangerously close if he intervened. I wasn't there, Barbara," Richard stammered, his voice vibrating with an unvarnished survival instinct. He raised his hands higher. "I was at work when she went to Victoria's house. I didn't touch the drawer. I didn't tell her to take the RV. I'm not involved in this." Barbara stopped struggling entirely. She stared at her husband, her mouth slightly open in sheer, horrifying disbelief. He was actively throwing her to the wolves to save his own skin, exactly as quickly as she had abandoned all logic to save their golden child. "You're not involved?" Barbara shrieked, her voice cracking into a high-pitched, pathetic croak. "You paid for Leo's gas and his expensive winter jacket to celebrate him getting the RV. You knew exactly what we were doing. You drove me to her house." "Sir, place your hands behind your back," a second officer commanded sharply, his hand dropping to his utility belt. "You are being detained under suspicion of accessory to burglary and conspiracy." "No, wait, she's lying. She's hysterical," Richard screamed, his booming patriarchal voice shattering completely as a second pair of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheted loudly into the quiet night, binding his hands securely behind his back. "She is ruining our family over a piece of metal," Barbara sobbed uncontrollably, her expensive shoes dragging across the hardwood floor as the detective escorted her out the front door and down the steps toward the flashing red and blue strobe lights. Richard stood frozen in the center of his living room. Before being forcefully turned around by the second officer, he slowly looked down at his cell phone still resting on the coffee table. The arrogant, booming father who had threatened to cut me off from the family 20 minutes ago was completely broken. "Victoria, please," Richard whispered toward the phone, his voice trembling violently as the officer secured his cuffs. "They are your family. Your mother is 60 years old. She can't go to jail. Leo is going to lose his future if he gets a record. If you don't call the district attorney and fix this, they are going to federal prison. Please, I will buy you a new desk. I will pay for whatever damage they did. Just tell them it was a mistake." I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply ran my hand over the splintered oak of the drawer they had destroyed. "I cannot fix it, Richard," I stated cleanly, checking my watch. Why, because my commercial fleet underwriter already locked the liability policy when the State Highway Patrol initiated the felony stop on Leo. If I attempt to recant a sworn statement involving a $150,000 asset after my mother just confessed to burglary on an active police body camera, I will be indicted for insurance fraud. I reached forward and rested my finger on the red disconnect button on my screen. "You don't need to cut me off from the family," I noted quietly, delivering the final, technical blow, "because I just cut the family off from my assets." I disconnected the call, placed the phone face down on my desk, and closed my laptop without looking back. The line went completely, abruptly dead. My cell phone rested face down on the polished oak of my desk, directly next to the violently splintered, ruined drawer. The distant, a faint wail of municipal police sirens rapidly fading into the suburban night was the only remaining sound of my family's complete disintegration. I didn't cry. I didn't feel a single trace of guilt for destroying their lives. When you deliberately weaponize an emergency house key to physically break into your daughter's home, pry open a locked piece of furniture with a screwdriver, and hand a $150,000 commercial asset to an unemployed 26-year-old so he can play pretend millionaire in the woods, you don't get to use the family shares its wealth defense when the federal penal code finally catches up to you. I leaned back in my leather office chair, the soft glow of my desk lamp illuminating the military-grade telematics dashboard, still active on my laptop screen. The pulsating red icon marking my massive motorhome was entirely secure inside a heavily fortified commercial impound lot across state lines. My assets were locked down. My liability was entirely zeroed out. I simply reached for the heavy brass knob of the ruined desk drawer, closed it as best as I could against the splintered wood, and turned off the desk lamp. Over the next 12 months, the federal and state justice systems executed an absolute masterclass in bureaucratic destruction, or answering every single threat my family had ever made against me with strict, uncompromising judicial mathematics. Because Leo had deliberately driven a stolen $150,000 commercial asset across a state border to go camping with his wealthy friends, his case was instantly elevated to a priority federal felony under the Dyer Act, the National Motor Vehicle Theft Act. His high-priced defense attorney attempted to argue that it was a civil family dispute, but the federal prosecutor simply played the high-definition security footage of my mother violently breaking open my locked desk drawer with a flathead screwdriver. You cannot claim implied familial consent when a physical burglary is required to access the keys. Leo's arrogant, untouchable golden child persona was completely obliterated in federal court. To 48 months in a minimum security federal penitentiary, followed by 3 years of heavily monitored supervised release. His networking weekend permanently destroyed any chance he ever had of securing a corporate job, renting a luxury apartment, or getting a financial loan. My parents did not escape the blast radius. The public demand for accountability was absolute, and the district attorney delivered. Barbara, the matriarch who genuinely believed that her bloodline made her immune to the law, was indicted on state felony charges for residential burglary and destruction of private property. Because she had formally confessed on a recorded phone line to police officers that she broke the desk, and because the security footage was irrefutable, she had no defense. When the judge explicitly cited her, the family shares its wealth excuse, as evidence of profound delusion. She was sentenced to 36 months in a state prison facility, instantly triggering her permanent expulsion from her exclusive suburban country club. Richard, the booming patriarch who had desperately tried to throw his wife under the bus in their living room to save himself, was indicted for accessory before the fact. And he had driven her to my house and actively funded the illegal camping trip. He received 3 years of supervised felony probation and 2,000 hours of mandatory community service. Their financial ruin was the final devastating blow. My commercial fleet underwriter aggressively subrogated the entire cost of the theft directly against my parents' personal assets. Richard and Barbara were legally forced to pay exactly $3,200 to completely repair and restore my custom oak desk, and an additional $8,500 to cover the specialized commercial heavy-duty towing and multi-state impound fees required to extract the massive RV from the state park. To pay the $11,700 in direct restitution and their exorbitant legal defense fees, they were forced to completely liquidate their retirement portfolios and sell their luxury SUV, the exact same vehicle Barbara had claimed wasn't suitable for Leo's networking trip. Or they eventually had to downgrade from their pristine suburban home to a cramped, aging apartment on the edge of the city. My motorhome was released back to me entirely unharmed 3 days later. I upgraded my home security system with exterior biometric scanners, permanently changed every lock on the property, and filed a permanent, highly restrictive restraining order against all 3 of them, which a judge granted immediately. When they thought they could use a flathead screwdriver and a toxic family communism excuse to steal a massive, highly insured commercial asset so an unemployed 26-year-old could show off to his rich friends in the woods, they thought I would simply panic, surrender the property, and absorb the liability to avoid embarrassing them. They completely forgot that a director of fleet risk management doesn't argue with entitled thieves. I just pulled up the military-grade telematics. You called the state troopers and let the federal justice system hand them the bill. If your entitled family used a screwdriver to break into your locked desk, stole the keys to your $150,000 luxury motorhome so your unemployed brother could show off to his wealthy friends and threaten to disown you if you called the cops, would you have tracked the GPS and called the state troopers, or would you have just let them keep it for the weekend to keep the family peace? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of absolute satellite-tracked federal justice, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. See you in the next video.